I'm glad you're with us today for the Central Conversations podcast. Today, we're going to talk about connecting and reconnecting as a family. I am pleased to introduce our special guest on the podcast today. KathyHeustess is the director of the Holston Center for Wellbeing, which offers professional counseling services to clergy and clergy family members. This ministry exists for supporting the emotional, spiritual, and relational well-being of clergy families, and Holston Conference churches. Kathy has a master's in social work and is also a licensed mental health care professional. She talks to people all day, and so she's uniquely qualified to help us as we talk about, connecting with people and reconnecting with people as we start to re-engage more with one another. So welcome, KathyHeustess, to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar with you or, your the Center for Wellbeing, can you tell people a little bit more?
Well, I'm also an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church, and I'm married to an ordained elder. And we have two children. One is 16, the other is 22. And the Holston Center for Wellbeing is, it exists for clergy and church staff and conference staff in the Holston Conference to promote wellness, both on an emotional and spiritual and relational and physical level for conference employees and clergy all over.
Well, I can only imagine what this, when I say year, I guess it's hard to really sometimes separate 2021 from 2020. How has your work, changed since the pandemic started, and what kind of issues are you finding that you talk to folks about?
Well, I don't know that it's changed. It's just intensified because clergy are dealing with unprecedented anxiety, both personally and in their congregations. And so if you call me for an appointment, it's probably going to be about 3 weeks out before you can get one, because I'm just booked back-to-back appointments. There's no shortage of people wanting to see me. And it's really, it's just a unique time. All the rules are changing, the way you do pastoral care, whether to have worship or not, worries about financial sustainability of our churches and so forth. So, clergy have a lot of stress anyway. And then when you add the pandemic and denominational politics, it's just a time of unprecedented anxiety.
For sure. Well, looking at your background, I feel less anxious already. So, it makes me look forward to the summer and taking a vacation. So that's awesome. One of the things I've been talking to some folks about in recent weeks, I would say, was really about the effect of isolation on people, but specifically, children, teenagers, and, obviously, you're a person of confidentiality, of course, but, what are some of the long-term effects, do you think, of isolation on people and children and teens in particular?
Well, I don't think people use this word, but really it is a grief reaction. It's a loss of normal routines. Um, Plans have changed, just like vacations. People aren't taking vacations. School is sometimes in, sometimes out, sometimes virtual. And those losses all add up to withdrawal, isolation, irritability. Sometimes you might see mood swings and regressive behavior in children and teens. Um, so it's difficult for parents also to manage jobs and taking care of kids that are supposed to be in school, but they're not. I think we're all created to be in relationship with one another. And when you get cut off from those relationships, that loss of community, that's a grief response as well. Loss, it just doesn't feel normal. Sometimes you can't see your grandparents and can't see neighbors. It's really a grief reaction.
Mm. So as I just know as a parent of 5 kids myself, and some of them are older than others, um, you know, what can be done to help these kids and families as they try to integrate? I know that there's, from just own personal experience and from communication, a lot of people are screened out in terms of Zoom meetings or school, those types of things. What are things can be done to try to help bring people together?
Well, I think uh, parents and other caregivers or teachers need to acknowledge these losses with the children and the teens. Allow them to experience their feelings, give them permission to feel the loss. Um, Use a lot of patience and get them to talk about it as much as you can, to help them acknowledge their feelings and just work through it, to the other side.
Yeah, so just really trying to encourage them to talk out some of the things that they're feeling, give them permission to address that and not keep it under the rug, so to speak.
Right. Just bring it out into the open and name it for what it is.
Yeah. Any other, practical things in terms of, even when the pandemic is over, whenever that is, but just how can families try to stay connected? Because at some point, uh, you're around each other a lot. And sometimes that, one family told me recently, well, it was a husband and wife, and they said, well, we haven't killed each other yet, So like, how do you give people permission to kind of give them space, but how do you, use this as a time to draw greater strength from each other, if that makes sense?
Well, I think we have times of being together and times of being separate, and there's kind of this in and out motion. Sometimes people go to their rooms for for being alone or needing some privacy. Then there's times around perhaps family meals, or game night or something like that where you can come together. So it's just kind of managing each person's need for space in individual needs versus the needs of the whole family.
Yeah. Well, and I've talked to a number of people who felt strangely blessed in a sense during this pandemic, in the fact that they've had to shut, even though things are more open now as they were earlier, but had to shut everything down and not going out at night or those types of things has been a blessing too. So, what about, in your work? I'm sure people talk about their spouse, and marriages are really core and central in families. How, how, how would you recommend these marriages kind of overcome these stresses and strains that they're feeling, from either if it's, uh, just their own work pressures, their own trying to teach the kids and keep the household going. So how can marriages become stronger during this time?
Well, that's an ongoing issue. Careers and raising children and all. Usually, what suffers is the marriage. It's kind of put on a back burner because of the busyness of raising children and having careers. But marriage, I tell people marriage is like a garden. It needs to be tended. If you don't tend the garden, the weeds grow up and they'll choke out the produce. So it's a matter of having regular communication and cultivating the marital friendship. And part of cultivating the marital friendship is having positive communication. The more positive communication you have versus negative communication, the more likely you'll stay together as partners. And then there's marriage counseling, which can be done, through telemental health. You don't have to go in person right now and see a marriage counselor. You can dial them up on your Zoom call or some other platform, because most therapists now are seeing folks that way. So
Yeah, that's true. And really, marriage counseling is really not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's sort of like, even if I heard one person put it this way, I take my car in to get serviced every once in a while. I should probably take some time to force to look under the hood in our relationship and talk about
right.
things. So, is there anything that marriages, I'm also thinking of people watching this podcast might be, married for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 30 or 40 or maybe 50 years even. Is there any like little exercise that a husband and a wife could do to talk through their just to engage in growing more intimately together?
Well, I'll give you a resource for people to consult. There's a marriage guru by the name of John Gottman, and he was a researcher at the University of Washington in Seattle, and he has studied marriages extensively, and he's written on that. So if you want to know, what works based on research, consult some of his literature. He has books, he has DVDs. He's really the top expert when it comes to marriages. But I think the key again is cultivating that marital friendship. And you cannot neglect a friendship or it'll die. So it's the same concept that you need to regularly communicate, and tend the garden, be nurturing to one another.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And one thing that I was encouraged by, on social media, we're filming this the day after Valentine's Day, and what I liked on so many people's different posts was just, really lifting up their spouse as their best friend. And so I think, it's just obviously not just a one day kind of thing. So, um, often during this pandemic, we focused on, things we can't do, but there's a lot of things we can do. And I think, even as I've talked to people off and on, some people have made some positive changes in their life as a result of this pandemic. Um, what are, I'm just curious, what are some positives that you find people are, um, either changes they're making or positives from this pandemic in people's lives?
Well, most of the people I see are pastors and their families, and they have told me that they have slowed down and enjoyed a little bit slower pace of life. There's not this frenetic programming that they have to do all the time. So that's been helpful. Um, Having time for reading and reflection has been life-giving, and coming together with their families. Again, just having time for board games or family interactions. Um, it's been helpful to have a slower pace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And hopefully some of the habits that we've, learned that were forced upon us, that we can, when things begin to open up more, we can still continue to maintain those. So, um, one of the things, just as you mentioned about pastors and churches, more and more churches are reopening. Some have been open for a while. Ours, in particular, we've been suspended for worship for the past several months. We're looking to open in a couple weeks. Um, I think one of the challenges that people are going to have is re-engaging with some relationships that they haven't had in a while with their fellow church members. Do you have any suggestions or practically that could help individuals or churches as they, you know, reintegrate with one another?
Well, I would say, you have to make safety the number one concern. And there are certainly resources out there like the CDC website, and even the Alban Institute has lots of suggestions for reintegrating worship, including no singing yet and no shaking hands yet. And they do advocate for shorter sermons.
Uh-huh.
So, and I think that's been the trend too. But, you know, talking about re-engaging, like maybe having some socially awkward situations, not knowing how to connect with people after this COVID. I think the best thing to do is just to name that and speak to it. Just say, gosh, I'm finding this to be awkward, or, not as easy as it once flowed. Just name it and get it out there, because chances are, if you're feeling that way, other people are feeling that way too. So just get it, kind of just name it and get it out there, and go from there. It's going to be um, just probably there's going to be some awkwardness as congregations reconnect with one another. But again, people are made for relationships, and it's so important to have community, and that's been denied for so long. So I think people are really going to embrace being part of a community again.
And you mentioned the phrase social awkwardness. Uh, you know, just re-engaging. For example, a lot of times we're used to kind of making small talk and those types of things. Beyond just naming, the fact that it's going to be socially awkward. Is there at times with people maybe we haven't seen as much or we don't know as well? Is there anything other practically, just to kind of help you or help people who might be afraid to kind of re-engage with people because they don't know what they're going to say, or they're not going to recognize what they look like with a mask, and or forget somebody's name? And I think there's some fear and anxiety around that. Any type of practical thing a person can do just to kind of overcome some of their social awkwardness?
Well, there's been such fear around gatherings because of COVID. And so I think people are going to come back with still some anxiety. I think just allowing yourself to take it slow, take some deep breaths. Don't force yourself to do anything that's too uncomfortable. Just kind of take it easy and slow as you try to re-engage.
That's good. Yeah. So don't try to make it happen. Just realize it's going to be sort of like building muscles again, right? And like if you go into therapy or something like that, it's just going to take some physical therapy. Taking some time to get there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Self-compassion.
So I'm sorry, I interrupt. Go ahead.
I was just saying self-compassion. Just be gentle with yourself and don't expect too much.
Right. Yeah. So and also, I guess the fact that I have to remind myself that um, it just didn't happen in a week, right? So it's going to take some time to kind of re-engage seasonally as well, too.
Right.
Are there any resources that you would direct people to that you have been directing people to that have been helpful for them just to kind of grow, or like a podcast or a book or a blog, if it's about marriage or just about reconnecting with one another, that you have found really helpful that you'd want to share?
Well, again, I would mention John Gottman's work. Um, People could be directed to that who are interested in improving their marriage. Um, I think the CDC has great information out there that includes mental health, and the Alban Institute as well. And then early on, I sent out a thing I found on Facebook called Mental Health Wellness Tips for Quarantine. And there's about 25 different things that you can do to keep your mental health good during this quarantine period. I can forward that to you if you want to, list that on your website.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And what we've been doing is kind of identifying in the notes on the show notes that come along with the video. We'll link to all those things so people can access them and research them uh, as they wish. So that'd be helpful. I appreciate
Okay,
that.
great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, any other kind of wisdom in terms of connecting or reconnecting that you think would be helpful for people?
I just think that people are ready to re-engage. They really lost that sense of community, and they want to re-engage. They need to be together. Of course, safety is still the number one concern, so doing that safely is important. And I think just take things slowly and be as safe as possible.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Yeah, that's a great word of not trying to just make it happen, but just be patient with yourself and the groups that you've been a part of, and that will come back. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, Kathy, if they had a question or that type of thing, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
Well, I can give out our phone number at the office. Would that be okay? Or they could contact me by email.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. What I'll do is I'll just provide the link on those two things as well. And
Okay,
yeah, so well,
sounds good.
great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and you've helped a lot of people today as they try to think through reconnecting and really giving themselves permission to take it slower and to it'll happen. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kathy. You take care.
You too.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.